welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. It's a normal day, or at least it should have been. The sun was hanging low in the sky, casting its usual golden glow over the suburban streets. Birds were doing that thing they always do, chirping, flying in tight little formations that always seemed to mock my indecision. I was heading out to grab some coffee, a simple thing, a routine, just another day in the grind. But then, just as I stepped out the door, that sound hit me. It was a shrill, electronic beep, followed by a voice. Calm, far too calm, considering what was happening. "This is an emergency alert. Please pay close attention. A widespread event is occurring. Do not attempt to follow the crowd." It wasn't the usual loud, panic-stricken tone we're used to hearing when something major happens. It was methodical, measured. The voice was clinical, like a pre-recorded message that had been played thousands of times before. Nothing new, nothing to worry about, but something about it was off. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and a strange weight settled in my stomach. It wasn't like the usual alerts that made your heart race with adrenaline. No, this one felt like it was wrapping its fingers around your soul, slowly tightening. I stepped back inside and stood frozen for a moment, staring at my phone. Was it a glitch? A malfunction? I could hear the usual neighborhood noises outside. Dogs barking, children yelling, the soft hum of distant traffic. Nothing seemed out of place. Yet, something in the air felt wrong, like the atmosphere was different, charged somehow. Another beep cut through the silence, and the alert came through again. "This is an emergency alert. Please pay close attention. A widespread event is occurring. Do not attempt to follow the crowd." It didn't help that my phone screen kept flashing this odd message, like it was trying to make sure I didn't miss it. It wasn't just on the phone either. I could hear faint echoes of it on the television, but it was muted and distorted, like a radio station fading in and out. I grabbed my jacket, feeling a sudden need to step outside again. Something was pulling me, like the world was tugging me just a little bit closer to the edge of something I didn't want to look at. Maybe it was just paranoia, or maybe it was the way the streets felt different, even though nothing had really changed. The air was thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I pushed the door open and stepped onto the porch. Across the street, my neighbor Dave was standing in his front yard, staring into the distance. He wasn't doing anything. No phone, no gestures, just standing there. The way he was just locked in place, as if time had decided to skip over him. I waved. He didn't respond, not even a blink. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled again. This was not normal, not even close. A few houses down, a group of people had gathered, several families, talking in hushed tones. Their faces were unreadable, their movements deliberate but somehow disjointed. It wasn't like a normal neighborhood gathering, where people laughed and shouted over each other. No, this felt different. They moved in slow, synchronized motions, as though they had rehearsed it. Their heads all turned at once, eyes scanning the street, as if waiting for some signal. I frowned, my instinct telling me to turn back inside, to lock the door and not look back. But curiosity, that all-too-human flaw, kept me rooted to the spot. That's when the sirens began. Not the usual fire truck or ambulance kind of sirens. These were different. They were long, drawn-out wails, like an animal calling to another animal in a language I couldn't understand. The noise came from nowhere and everywhere at once, echoing off the houses, the trees, the streetlights. And yet, in the midst of that eerie wail, I noticed something I had missed before. The people in the crowd were no longer just standing there. They were moving now. Slowly, but surely, they started walking toward the center of town, like a single body, moving together, perfectly synchronized. Their steps were almost mechanical, and there was no chatter, no calls to one another, no children asking for permission to go play. It was silent, aside from the strange wailing noise and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. I glanced back at Dave, wondering if he had noticed the strange parade. He was still standing there, but his gaze had shifted. He was no longer staring into the distance. Now he was watching the crowd, his expression vacant. There was no urgency, no sense of surprise or alarm, just that hollow stare. Something wasn't right. A chill settled in my bones, and I could feel my breath quickening, despite the warm afternoon sun. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just some sort of mass hysteria or groupthink that made everyone act in lockstep. Maybe it was some sort of protest or performance art. But as I stood there, paralyzed by the scene unfolding, I couldn't help but feel something else. Something darker. A voice broke through my thoughts. Do not follow the crowd. They do not know where they are going. I jumped, instinctively reaching for my phone. The alert had come through again, but this time the voice was different, more insistent, almost desperate. I glanced back at the people in the crowd. They were closer now, nearing the end of the block, and as I watched, a strange, unsettling urge started creeping into my mind. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was something else, something darker, something compelling me to follow them. Do not follow the crowd. I shook my head, trying to clear it, but the sensation of being drawn toward them grew stronger. The street felt like it was shrinking, the distance between me and the crowd becoming impossibly small. I wanted to turn away, to retreat inside, but my feet stayed planted. I caught my reflection in the glass of the door, my own face staring back at me, wide-eyed and pale. A pulse of unease surged through me as I realized I was no longer thinking clearly. Something inside me screamed to stop, but the rest of me was already moving. The crowd was waiting, and I was about to follow. I stood there for a moment, torn between the primal urge to run back inside and lock the door, and the bizarre compulsion pulling me forward. It was like a thread tugging at the pit of my stomach, drawing me in with a quiet, insidious force. The crowd continued to move, and I watched as they slowly drifted further down the street, the pace deliberate, but without haste, as if they were on a timed march to nowhere. The sirens wailed in the distance, blending with the sound of footsteps, their rhythm almost hypnotic. I could hear murmurs, but they weren't like regular conversations. They were more like murmurs of assent, quiet acknowledgments between strangers who seemed to know exactly where they were going, as though it had been planned all along. There was no fear, no panic, just a steady, synchronized movement that felt wrong. I snapped myself out of it, shaking my head as if to clear away the fog that had descended upon me. Don't follow them, I muttered under my breath, trying to remind myself of the warning that had come through the emergency alert. But even as I spoke the words, my legs began to move. Hesitantly at first, then with more purpose. Something inside me fought it. Something deep within screamed that I should turn around, run, lock myself in my house and forget any of this had happened. But the force of the crowd was overpowering, as if an invisible hand was gently guiding me along with them. My feet were taking steps before I could stop them, and I barely had time to register the unease curling inside me before I was moving down the sidewalk, inching closer to the growing mass of people. The air felt heavier as I joined them, like the weight of the world had shifted and was pressing down on me. I scanned the faces around me, people I'd seen in passing at the grocery store walking their dogs, but now their expressions were blank, vacant. There was no sign of the personalities I'd recognized. No smiles, no greetings, just empty eyes staring straight ahead, as if they were all plugged into something that I couldn't see. And then I saw Dave again. He was still standing in his front yard, but now he was closer to the street, eyes locked on the crowd. His face hadn't changed. It was still that same vacant expression, like he wasn't truly there. My heart skipped a beat. He hadn't been part of the crowd before. He had been standing still, frozen, and now he was staring at us. At me. "Dave!" I called out, my voice trembling. But it didn't reach him. His gaze never shifted, not an inch. It was like he couldn't hear me, or worse, like he didn't care to. I took another step forward. The air was thick with the sounds of footsteps, the collective hum of murmurs, but no one spoke to one another. The whole scene had a chilling sense of unity, like we were all part of something much larger than ourselves, something much older, something that knew exactly what it was doing. I glanced back one last time at my house. The door was still open, the dark interior calling to me. But the pull of the crowd was stronger now, drawing me forward with a force that I couldn't explain. My feet moved with more confidence, no longer hesitant. The ground beneath me felt more like an illusion, as though I was walking on something far more treacherous than pavement. The street ahead seemed to bend and twist in ways it shouldn't. I knew these roads like the back of my hand, but the houses, the trees, the parked cars, they looked distorted, like they were on the edge of my vision, waiting to slip away into something wrong. There was something deeply unnatural about it, and yet I couldn't stop myself from moving forward. And then the sirens grew louder. They were closer now, and they were no longer just wailing. Now they were screaming. It was a pitch that scraped against my eardrums, making my stomach churn. But no one else seemed to notice. The crowd kept walking, unbothered, unhurried, as if this was all just part of the plan. The strange thing was, even though they walked in sync, they didn't move like a group of people at all. No, it was more like a mass of individuals who had been puppeteered into a single direction. Each step was calculated, measured, like they were following an invisible leader, a leader I couldn't see, but could feel in the way the crowd moved. I could feel it too, the pull, the almost magnetic force tugging me toward them, toward something I didn't understand. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw something else. A man, a stranger, standing by the side of the street, watching us as we passed. He was staring intently at the crowd, but his eyes weren't vacant. They were sharp, almost accusing. I turned my head toward him, but before I could focus on his face, he was gone, just vanished, like he'd melted into the background, disappearing as easily as smoke in the wind. I froze for a split second, my heart pounding in my chest. Did anyone else see that? Was it just me? The air felt too thick, the moment too strange, and my head was spinning from the continuous drone of the sirens. But the crowd didn't react. They didn't notice. They didn't even flinch. I should have stopped. I should have turned back. But I didn't. I kept moving, drawn along by that strange, insistent force. As we passed more houses, the streets began to look more familiar, more wrong. The rows of houses blurred into a uniform landscape. The front yards, the mailboxes, the gardens, they all seemed the same. And yet, nothing felt like it was real. It was as if the world had been stripped down to its most basic, hollow elements, and the only thing left was this strange, mechanical march of people. My eyes darted around, searching for any sign of something that could break this cycle. But the more I looked, the more unsettling it became. There was no one else on the street, no one driving by in cars, no sirens from ambulances or police cars, even though the sirens had reached a deafening pitch. It was as if we were the only ones left in the world. And then I saw it. At the end of the block, where the street bent, a figure appeared. It wasn't a person, at least not in the way I understood people. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its silhouette shifted unnaturally, as if it were made of smoke, not flesh. It didn't move like a human. It didn't walk. It just hovered, watching us with an intensity that sent ice running through my veins. I should have stopped. I should have turned around, run the other way. But instead, my feet kept moving, closer, closer, and as we reached the bend, the sirens reached a pitch so high it almost felt like they were vibrating my bones. The figure at the end of the block wasn't a person. I could feel that in my gut, even before I could see the details clearly. It wasn't even a shadow. It was something more unnatural, something that shouldn't be there. Its presence sent a ripple through the air, like a disturbance in the fabric of the world itself. The crowd continued marching forward, oblivious to the strange anomaly ahead. But I wasn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some oddity. This was the key. Whatever was happening, it was tied to that figure. I should have turned back then. I should have stopped walking. But my body was no longer under my control. It was like my feet had a mind of their own, propelled by something I didn't understand. Something in my chest twisted as I kept moving closer. My heart hammered in my throat. The figure wasn't moving, but it was watching, its gaze fixed on the crowd as though it was waiting for something. The sirens were still wailing, their pitch rising higher and higher, piercing the air until it felt like my eardrums might burst. It didn't help that the crowd seemed so utterly oblivious. Not a single person turned their head. Not a single footstep faltered. They just kept marching forward, their faces as blank as ever. I tried to look around, to make sense of what was happening. My eyes darted from person to person, searching for a sign that someone else saw what I was seeing. But everyone around me was moving in perfect sync, their eyes fixed ahead, their expressions vacant. They were like puppets being controlled by some unseen force. I couldn't tell if they were even conscious of the figure at the end of the block. But I was. As we drew closer to the bend, the figure became clearer. It was tall, taller than anyone had any right to be, its form stretching and distorting in ways that defied the natural order. It didn't have a face, not really. It had eyes, but they were too dark, too hollow, and its entire body seemed to shift with every step I took. The more I looked, the more impossible it became to track its movements. It wasn't just standing there. It was watching us, all of us. Its eyes seemed to follow every individual, its attention shifting like it was choosing who to focus on, but never truly locking in on anyone. It felt like it was staring directly into me, though, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was its target. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed for me to stop, to turn around and run, to forget I'd ever seen the thing at the end of the street. But my legs kept moving. They couldn't stop. And worse, the crowd behind me didn't falter either. They continued their silent procession, like they were walking to a destination they knew and trusted. I glanced behind me, hoping, praying to see someone, anyone, who wasn't as hypnotized as I was. But there was no one. The street behind me was empty, as if the world beyond the stretch of road had faded into some distant, unreachable place. I felt the weight of isolation pressing on me. It was just me, the crowd, and the figure at the end of the street. A thought suddenly struck me. Why were we walking? What were we all doing? Where was this leading? I tried to call out again, to break the silence, to stop this madness. But my voice felt distant, swallowed by the deafening sirens. My throat tightened, and no words came out. The figure moved again, but not like a person. It was fluid, its body twisting and bending unnaturally as if it was a mirage, caught between states. It didn't walk. It didn't need to walk. It was simply there, waiting, watching. The way its head tilted just slightly made it feel like it was studying us, me specifically, as if it could see right through me. Its eyes were endless black pits, like they were pulling everything I knew into them, making everything else irrelevant. I took another step, and the air around me seemed to thicken, pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe. My vision wavered, and for a second, I thought I saw something flash in the periphery of my vision. The street, it wasn't right. It had been normal just moments ago, but now the houses seemed different, like they were somehow shifting and bending in on themselves. The streetlights, which had once looked so familiar, were flickering. Their light wavered like a candle in the wind, casting long, haunting shadows that seemed to stretch and warp across the sidewalk. I looked back at the crowd. They were still moving in perfect sync, like clockwork, No hesitation, no deviation. The woman to my left, the one who had been wearing a red sweater when I first saw her, now looked strange. Her face was blank, but her eyes were too wide, almost unnaturally so. They were fixed on me, not in recognition. No, it was more like she had noticed me noticing her. But she didn't stop. She didn't say anything. She just kept moving, her head slightly tilted, as if she were still trying to process why I wasn't like them. My pulse raced. It was all I could hear now. My heart was thudding in my ears, drowning out the wailing sirens, the murmurs, the sound of footsteps, the whispers of the crowd. It was just me and the figure and the heavy silence between us. We were getting closer to it. I could see its outline in sharper detail now. The way it loomed there, towering over the rest of the crowd, felt like something out of a nightmare. The air around it rippled, the edges of its form warping like heat rising off pavement in the summer. It didn't belong. It was out of place in a way I couldn't explain, and yet somehow it was exactly where it needed to be. It had a presence that made everything else feel insignificant. The crowd continued moving toward it. It didn't matter that the figure wasn't human. It didn't matter that it wasn't even entirely real. The people, myself included, kept walking, drawn in, irresistibly, like moths to a flame. I stumbled, my foot catching on the pavement. My head snapped up, and I realized with a shock that we had reached the bend. We were standing right in front of the figure now. It was taller than I could have imagined. Its outline was shifting, not in a way that suggested motion, but more like it was warping reality itself. It was impossible to describe, like it was made of shadows, but its presence was solid, real. Its eyes locked with mine. The air around us grew colder, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I was caught, trapped. Its gaze was like a vacuum, pulling the very breath from my chest. Then, without warning, it spoke. But not in words. No, the sound was inside my head, like a voice was ripping through the fabric of my thoughts. You shouldn't be here. The voice that echoed inside my head wasn't a voice at all. It was a presence, an overwhelming weight pressing down on me, digging into the back of my skull. A sharp, icy chill spread through my chest, the words sinking into me like needles. You shouldn't be here. I wanted to scream, to rip myself free from whatever force was holding me in place, but my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. The world had narrowed to that single point of contact between my eyes and the figures, and everything else. The crowd, the sirens, the warped street had melted away. Nothing else existed. My heartbeat was the loudest sound in the universe, hammering in my chest like it was trying to break free. I was drowning in it. Every beat was heavy, every breath a struggle. I tried to look away. I tried to break the hold, to look anywhere but at those dark, abyssal eyes, but it was like my body had been frozen in place. The more I fought against it, the tighter the grip became. Then the figure moved. It didn't step. It didn't walk. It just shifted. One moment it was standing tall and imposing at the end of the block, and the next it was right in front of me. The air between us had thickened, buzzing with an unnatural energy. My head swam. I couldn't comprehend what was happening. It didn't make sense. How could it be here? How could it move like that? Its form flickered in and out, like an image struggling to hold on to its place in reality. I could still see its shadowy, contorted shape, but it wasn't stable. The longer I looked at it, the more disorienting it became. Its outline seemed to bleed into the air itself, like it was becoming one with the darkness. It wasn't just standing there anymore. It was reaching out with something invisible, something that pressed against my skin, crawling under it, suffocating me. The crowd kept walking, undisturbed, moving as if this was just another stop on their endless march. I couldn't hear anything anymore. The sirens had faded into a dull hum, a distant memory. The murmurs of the crowd weren't there. It was as if the world had gone mute, leaving only the silence between me and the figure. You've made a choice, the voice whispered again. The words weren't spoken aloud. They were embedded deep in my mind, vibrating through my skull, my thoughts. It was a sickening sensation, as though the voice was crawling beneath my skin, burrowing deep until it became a part of me. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. The words didn't matter anymore. There was something more important, something more terrifying, lurking just beyond the surface of my consciousness. A ripple in the air. The figure's shape twisted again, its form stretching unnaturally, pulling at the edges of reality. It wasn't just watching me now. It was inside me, its presence bleeding into my thoughts, feeding off my fear. I tried to force myself to move, to run, but I was paralyzed, stuck in place by some unseen force. "You will follow," it said. The voice wasn't like a command. It was a statement, a fact, a reality I had no choice but to accept. It was the way it spoke that chilled me the most. Not with malice or anger, but with cold, impassive certainty. Like it knew me, like it had always known what I would do. There was no room for resistance, no hope for escape. I was part of this now, part of this strange, impossible march toward what? My mind flashed to the emergency alert. I'd received it just hours ago. The warning, don't follow the crowd. But that seemed so far away now, like a distant echo, lost in the thick fog of this nightmare. The words were meaningless. The crowd had already claimed me, and the figure had sealed my fate. I didn't know how much time had passed since I had last seen my own house. My feet had carried me so far from home, and the sense of distance felt infinite. There was no turning back, no return to what was familiar. The street had transformed into something else entirely. I was moving now, my feet obeying an order I hadn't given. The crowd was still in motion around me, but I wasn't walking as part of it anymore. No, it was more like I was tethered to it, dragged along by something far greater than any of us. My eyes flicked back to the figure, watching it shift and warp again, and I could feel my mind unspooling. I didn't know how to process what was happening. How could I? How could anyone? The houses I passed had become shells. Empty, featureless structures that didn't belong in this world. The lights inside were all out, the windows black, and the air had turned cold, biting. The streetlights flickered violently as I moved beneath them. Shadows danced on the pavement, twisted and elongated, as if mocking me, mocking the very concept of light. Nothing made sense. Nothing was real. I turned to the person next to me, a man I'd never seen before, and tried to speak. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. His face was blank, like the rest, his eyes staring straight ahead. He didn't even glance at me. It was like I wasn't there. It was like none of us were here. I wanted to grab him, shake him, ask him why, but my hands wouldn't move. My body wouldn't respond. I was a passenger in my own flesh. And then, out of nowhere, a voice, not the figure's, but a real one, spoke from behind me. "Where are we going?" I whirled around, heart in my throat, but the crowd continued its steady march. No one stopping, no one answering. The voice had come from one of the men in the crowd, someone who had turned slightly toward me, his mouth moving soundlessly. His eyes were wide, panicked, his movements jerky, like a broken puppet trying to resist the strings. But the crowd around him didn't slow down. No one even looked at him. He kept walking, but his voice came again, quieter this time, trembling. "Where are we going?" His words weren't meant for anyone else. They were meant for me. He was trying to break free, trying to make sense of this twisted reality. But the crowd kept walking. It didn't matter how loudly he cried out. It didn't matter how desperate he became. The figure's presence was too overwhelming, too powerful. It was pushing us forward, pulling us into whatever abyss lay ahead. And that's when I realized it. We weren't just walking toward something. We were walking toward the end. The air around me was heavier now, thicker, as if the world itself was closing in on me. Every breath was a struggle, and the path ahead seemed endless, stretching into an abyss where reality no longer made sense. The crowd continued to march on, relentless, indifferent. Their eyes were glazed over, as if the soul had left their bodies. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going like this. I was breaking. The walls were closing in. Every step was dragging me further into whatever nightmare this had become. I tried to fight it. I tried to push back against the force that held me, to break free from the invisible strings pulling me forward, but it was useless. It was like trying to move through molasses. My legs felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. My chest tightened, each breath coming slower than the last. My head swam with confusion, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat, louder and louder, like it was the only thing left that was real. The figure was still ahead, still watching. It hadn't moved from its spot, but somehow it was always there, a looming presence in the distance. Its eyes were always on me, and I could feel its gaze burning into me, pulling at my mind, drawing me closer. I couldn't escape. I couldn't even look away. The sirens had stopped. In fact, everything had stopped except for the march, the people, the figure. The world around me had frozen, as if the fabric of time itself had unraveled and left us all in this stagnant moment. The street, the houses, the sky. It was all still, like a photograph, like a memory too distant to touch. But the crowd kept moving, relentlessly, mechanically. I tried again to scream, to cry out, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't speak, couldn't even swallow. My mouth felt dry, parched, like I hadn't had a drink in days. My body was a prison. It was as if every part of me had been taken over by the presence of the figure, that unseen force that had bound me in its grip. I was nothing. I was a spectator to my own life, trapped in a body that no longer belonged to me. I looked to my left at the man who had spoken earlier, the one who had asked where we were going. He was still walking, his eyes wide, his face twisted in fear, but he wasn't moving in a natural way. He was jerking, spasming, like his body was fighting itself, like it wanted to break free but couldn't. His mouth opened, as if he were trying to speak, but no sound came out. His face was contorted in panic, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes, something that resembled awareness, like he realized he wasn't alone in this madness. But just as quickly, the look faded, and his face went blank again. His body returned to its rhythmic, robotic pace, and he became just another part of the crowd, another mindless automaton moving toward the inevitable. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't just walk like this, not knowing where we were headed, not knowing why this was happening. It felt like my mind was splintering, like the pressure of this unrelenting force was too much to bear. I had to do something. I had to find a way out of this nightmare, no matter what it took. I forced my legs to stop. Just for a moment, I stopped moving. I stood still in the middle of the crowd, trying to make sense of what was happening. But the more I focused on the figure, the more I felt its presence tugging at me, drawing me forward. It was like a magnet pulling at my soul, trying to drag me closer, to make me part of whatever twisted reality it controlled. My breath was shallow now, coming in quick, panicked bursts. The world seemed to be narrowing, closing in on me, and the space between the crowd and the figure was shrinking. I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand it. The pressure was unbearable, suffocating. It was like the air had turned to concrete, pressing down on my chest. And then I heard a voice, not in my head this time, but a real voice, a whisper that came from somewhere deep in the crowd. "Help me." I whipped around, heart leaping into my throat. The voice was quiet, desperate, but it was there. Someone else had spoken. Someone else was awake. I scanned the crowd frantically, trying to catch sight of the person who had spoken. But everyone's faces were the same, blank, expressionless, like mannequins. There was no sign of anyone who might have been trying to break free, no one who was aware of the nightmare around them. But that voice, it had been real. It had been different. I took a step backward, my body finally obeying me, and I found myself standing at the edge of the crowd. I could still see the figure ahead, still feel its presence watching, waiting. But something in me snapped. I wasn't going to let this happen. I wasn't going to follow like everyone else. I wasn't going to let the figure pull me into whatever hell it was planning. I started to move again, slowly at first, then faster. My legs were shaky, but I didn't care. I had to get away. I had to find a way to stop this madness. But with every step I took, it was like the air got thicker, heavier. I felt a pull, an invisible force dragging me back toward the center of the crowd, toward the figure. It was stronger now, more insistent, like the ground itself was fighting me. I gritted my teeth and kept moving. I wasn't going to be its puppet. I wasn't going to let it control me. But the moment I turned my head, the world around me shifted. The street stretched out longer than it should have. The houses blurred into the distance, and the lights flickered like they were struggling to stay on. The sky was dark, too dark, and I realized, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, that I wasn't moving forward anymore. I was back where I started. I looked ahead, and there it was again, the figure standing just as it had before. Its eyes were locked on mine. I could feel the pull, the weight of its gaze pressing down on me, seeping into my thoughts, twisting my mind. I was caught in its grip. Again, I tried to scream. I tried to fight it, but I was frozen, stuck. There was no escape. I don't know how long it's been since I stopped moving. Time has become this distorted blur, like I'm trapped in some sick loop where nothing matters anymore. The seconds stretch out, but they never really pass. There's no concept of time here, just the same unrelenting forward motion, just the crowd, just the figure. The weight on my chest is unbearable. I try to breathe, but it feels like the air is made of glass, sharp and jagged, cutting through me with each inhale. I can't escape it. I can't escape any of this. Every time I try to take control, the world shifts around me, like it's mocking me. I can feel the force pulling me in, pulling all of us in, and I don't know if I want to resist anymore. It's not just fear. Something else. It's like I'm losing myself, losing my grip on reality. And maybe that's the plan. I turned my head again. The crowd kept marching. They were still so damn sure of where they were going, so confident in their steps, so blank in their eyes. The longer I stared at them, the more I realized something. That's what I've become too. A mindless drone. Just another body in this parade of despair. There was nothing left inside me. Just emptiness, stretching out to match the abyss ahead. And the figure is always there, always watching, always waiting. I don't know if it's closer or further, but I can feel its presence, like it's wrapping itself around me, like I'm suffocating beneath its weight. But it doesn't matter, because no matter how hard I try, no matter how desperately I claw at the air, I can't break free. I can't even move. I'm stuck. The figure's eyes are still on me, but I can't look away. I don't want to, and I do at the same time. My gaze is locked with that darkness, and it feels like it's pulling me in, slowly, relentlessly. Like it's not just watching me, it's feeding on me. My fear, my terror, my desperation. I wish I could scream. I wish I could tear myself free from this invisible grip. But it's like my mind has been peeled open, and everything I was before is slipping away. I'm nothing now. Nothing but a puppet in a play I didn't audition for. The figure doesn't need to do anything. It just exists, and I'm helpless to its pull. And then something changes. A shift. A feeling that wasn't there before. There's a rustle, a slight disturbance in the crowd. A murmur. I glance to my left and see a woman. She's different from the others. She's not walking in sync with the rest of them. Her movements are jagged, like she's trying to break free, like she's aware of the nightmare we're in. She stumbles, her face contorted in panic. Her eyes dart around, searching for something that isn't there. She looks directly at me, and for a moment, I feel a flicker of recognition, connection. But just as quickly as it comes, it vanishes. Her eyes dull again, and she turns back to the crowd, falling in step with the others, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I want to scream at her. I want to grab her and shake her and tell her to wake up, to fight back, but I can't even move my mouth. I can't do anything. My hands are shaking, and I can feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I'm too numb to cry. Another step forward. The figure watches, always watching. I hear the faintest whisper, like a breeze brushing past my ear, but there's no wind, no air. You are one of us now. The voice. It's not the figure's voice this time. It's mine, or it was. It's like my thoughts have been twisted, manipulated, taken over by whatever force controls this place. I hear it in my head, and it's not a warning. It's a fact. I've been consumed. This is my fate now. There's no escaping it. The crowd is my family. The figure is my master. I am nothing more than another cog in the wheel. I glance back at the woman, hoping that maybe she'll snap out of it, but she's gone. Just another body, another empty face. There's no one left who's awake. There's no one who's going to help me. I was fooling myself to think I could fight this, to think I could get out. I want to be wrong. I want to feel the fire of rebellion again. I want to rage against this, but I don't know where the strength comes from anymore. I want to close my eyes, to shut it all out, but I can't. If I close my eyes, I'm still here. If I blink, I'm still here. There's no escape. The figure stirs again. I don't know how, but it's moved. It's closer. No, it's not. Can't be. But it is. I don't know how, but it is. My body reacts before my mind can process it. I step forward. My legs are moving without my permission. The air feels colder, heavier, suffocating. I want to stop. I want to shout, but I can't. I can't do anything. The street ahead is getting darker, more oppressive. The buildings loom over us like silent, watching giants. They're closing in too. The houses are warping. The windows are cracked, and I swear I can hear whispers coming from the shadows. But when I look closer, there's nothing there. The figure's eyes are burning into me again. I can feel it. The weight of its gaze is like 100,000 tons pressing down on me, grinding me into the pavement. And then I hear it again. You are one of us now. This time, the voice isn't just in my head. It's coming from the crowd. It's coming from the others. The people around me. They're saying it, whispering it, chanting it. We are one. We are one. I hear their voices, and it makes my stomach churn. It makes me want to scream, but I can't. I don't have the strength anymore. I don't know if I ever did. The crowd is closing in like the walls of a cage. I can feel the figure's presence now, right behind me. I can feel its cold breath on my neck. I am one of them now, and there's no way out. It's strange how the mind works when it's on the edge of breaking. I never thought I'd come to this point. This moment where I can feel myself slipping, but still somehow, some distant part of me is clawing, trying to hold on to something that feels real. Something that feels like me. I don't know how much longer I've been walking. Hours? Days? The crowd continues its endless march, and yet, nothing changes. The houses on either side of the street are darker now, more dilapidated, like the entire town is slowly sinking into decay. There are cracks in the pavement, weeds growing through the cracks like they're trying to escape too. But nothing escapes here. Not anymore. My feet move of their own accord, but my mind, my thoughts, they're still mine. Or at least they were. There's still some small, stubborn part of me that refuses to let go, refuses to fall in line with the others. But the more I fight, the more exhausted I feel. It's a constant, draining battle. I feel it in my bones. The weight of it, the pull of this endless procession. The figure is always there, looming in the distance, its eyes never leaving me. I can't stop looking at it. I don't even want to look away anymore, because when I do, I feel it pulling me back. It's like a tug of war between my body and whatever is controlling this nightmare. And I'm not sure how much longer I can hold on. The voice has been with me too. That whisper, that constant, insistent chant in my ear. At first, it was just a suggestion, something that sounded like an option. But now it's a command. It's a certainty. I'm becoming part of this. I can feel it. I'm being woven into whatever this is. I am one of them. I am becoming them. I've lost my sense of self. I've lost my will. But then, something shifts. A crack in the armor. A whisper that isn't the same. It's not part of the chant. It's not part of the crowd. It's faint, distant, like it's coming from the depths of my own mind. But it's real. You don't have to do this. I stop, almost stumbling as the words echo through me. They hit me like a shockwave. I'm aware of the stillness around me, the crowd moving forward without me, their rhythmic steps just as mechanical as before. But I stand still. For the first time in what feels like forever, I stop. I feel my pulse racing in my chest. My hands are trembling. What? I try to focus, try to catch the thread of that voice, that spark of resistance. But it's faint, like a distant memory, like the last flicker of a dying candle in a room full of darkness. You don't have to follow. You can still choose. Choose. The word rattles through my mind. What does that mean? How can I choose when everything has been taken from me? How can I choose when my body doesn't belong to me anymore? But the voice keeps repeating it, a soft, steady refrain, pushing through the fog in my mind. Choose. I take a breath, a real deep breath. The air is still thick, suffocating, but for a moment, it feels different. The weight on my chest is still there, but it's not as heavy. It's like there's a small crack in the wall surrounding me, a faint light flickering through. I can't explain it. I don't know how, but it's there. I look around. The crowd is still walking, still in sync, but there's a change in the atmosphere. The streets have become even darker, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. It's like the world itself is bending, like it's folding in on itself, and we're all caught in its grip. But somehow it doesn't feel like I'm as trapped as I was before. The figure is still ahead, still watching. I can feel its eyes always on me, but this time it doesn't feel as oppressive. It doesn't feel as controlling. I'm not sure if that's because I finally cracked, or if something else is happening. I don't know if this is my chance to break free, or if it's just another trick. But I know one thing, I have to decide. The voice comes again, this time clearer, more urgent. You can choose to stop. You can choose to turn around. You can choose to walk away from this. I shudder. My feet are still moving, still dragging me forward. But now, for the first time in what feels like forever, I feel the pull. It's not a physical pull. It's not the weight of the figure. It's something else. It's my mind. It's my fear. It's all the doubt that's taken root in my heart. The disbelief that this is real. The fear that if I turn away now, I won't be able to come back. That I'll lose everything. But if you stay, you will become one of them. I try to move, to take a step backward, but my body won't respond. It's like my legs are frozen. The crowd continues to push me forward, each step harder than the last. My heart races, and the voice in my head grows louder. You can't run from this. There is no escape. You know that, don't you? I want to scream. I want to fight. I want to turn and run, but I feel it. The presence of the figure behind me, looming. It's like the air is thick with its power, its influence. I can't escape it. I can't escape any of it. But then, just as I feel the cold grip of despair tightening around me, I hear that voice again. Not the one from the crowd. Not the one that's trying to drag me into the darkness. You still have a choice. Fight. Fight to the end. It's the same voice as before. The one that told me I didn't have to do this. The one that whispered I could still break free. The voice I'd almost forgotten. The voice that gives me a reason to fight, to live. I take a step backward. My body is fighting me, but I push through it. I refuse to give in. I refuse to let this consume me. The figure is close now, so close I can feel its presence, feel its eyes burning into my back. But I'm not looking at it anymore. I'm not afraid of it. I turn, slowly, tentatively. My legs shake. My heart races, but I turn. The The world spins around me, but I'm still standing. The streets are still dark, the houses still rotting, but there's a path ahead of me now, a path that wasn't there before. The crowd doesn't stop. They keep moving, keep chanting, but I've broken free, for now. And I know the figure will follow. It will always follow. But for the first time, I feel the spark of something else. A choice. I'm walking now, slowly, deliberately. Each step feels like I'm wading through molasses, but somehow, I'm moving. For the first time in what feels like forever, I'm moving of my own volition. I don't know how, I don't know why, but it's happening. The weight in my chest isn't as heavy anymore, and the suffocating air feels just a little easier to breathe. The crowd keeps moving forward, an ocean of bodies, all of them marching in perfect unison. Their faces blank, their movements mechanical. But I'm different now. At least I think I am. I feel different. I feel like I'm holding on to something, a thread of hope, or maybe something more fragile than that. A memory, a whisper, a stubborn defiance. I glance over my shoulder, and I feel it again, the figure, always there, always watching. It's not just watching now. I can feel its presence pressing down on me, surrounding me like a thick fog, trying to suffocate the last bits of resistance I have left. But I won't let it. I can't. I turn my attention back to the path ahead of me, and the street that stretches out before me feels wrong. The buildings loom over me, their windows cracked, their edges sharp and jagged like the teeth of some giant, hungry creature. The shadows between the buildings move. They shouldn't be moving, but they are. They're alive, shifting, as though the world itself is alive and watching me. Waiting, a flicker of panic rises in my chest, but I force it down. I can't let it take me. Not now. The voice, that voice that's been haunting me since this nightmare began, returns. It's quiet at first, barely a whisper, like it's coming from deep inside my own mind, but it's there. You're getting closer. Closer to what? I don't know. All I know is that the further I walk, the more the air around me seems to thicken, like the walls of reality are closing in. The ground beneath my feet feels uneven, unstable. Each step feels heavier than the last. It's like something is pulling me downward, trying to drag me back into the suffocating darkness that's always just behind me. But I keep walking. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, though. The weight of the figure's presence is pressing down harder now. It's not just behind me anymore. It's all around me, surrounding me in every direction. Like the darkness itself has turned into a physical force, an invisible wall I can't break through. The voices in my head are growing louder now, rising in a chorus, a maddening chant that I can't escape. I try to shut them out, but I can't. You are one of us now. The words echo through me like a physical blow. They've said it so many times, but each time it cuts deeper, like a knife twisting in my gut. I try to shake it off. I try to remind myself that I'm different, that I chose to turn away, that I'm not one of them. But the more I think about it, the more the doubt creeps in. The more I question myself. What does it mean to be one of us? Who are they? Who am I now? I stop. My breath catches in my throat as I look down at my hands. They're shaking, but that's not what stops me. It's the way they look. How pale, how thin they are, like the life has been drained out of them. My skin is cracked, dry, and my fingertips feel wrong, like they belong to someone else. I try to breathe, but my chest tightens, and I feel my pulse quicken. The air, which was already thick with dread, feels suffocating now. I try to take a step forward, but my legs feel weak, like they're made of stone. I can't move. The figure's presence is overwhelming now, closing in from all sides. Its eyes burn through me, even though I can't see them. I can feel them, right at the back of my mind, burrowing into my thoughts. You can't escape. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. It's not a question anymore. It's a statement. It's not about choice anymore. It's about inevitability. The figure is right. I can't escape, but I have to try. I have to. I look back at the crowd, still marching forward without pause, without question. They're still trapped in their trance, still slaves to the same force that's pulling me, the same force that's pulling all of us. But I can't be like them. I can't give in. I won't. The ground beneath my feet feels softer now, almost like quicksand. It's like the earth itself is pulling me down. The world around me is changing. The buildings are warping, bending in impossible angles. The shadows are growing, stretching toward me like hands reaching out to drag me back. I feel it in my bones now. The final step. I can feel the figure closing in on me, feel its presence wrapping around me like chains, but I won't give in. Not now. I take a deep breath and take another step. My body screams in protest, but I don't stop. I can't stop. I hear the voice again, but this time, it's not inside my head. It's coming from the crowd, from the darkness. You cannot outrun fate. You cannot escape. It's true. I know it's true, but I still refuse to believe it. There has to be a way out. There has to be something I can do. My body feels lighter now, as though I'm drifting, as though my feet aren't touching the ground anymore. It's as if I'm floating, but I'm not. I'm still here, still standing, but the world around me is shifting, changing. The figure is so close now, I can feel its breath on the back of my neck. I don't dare look back. I don't dare face it. I keep walking, one foot in front of the other, but the closer I get to the end, the more I realize the choice I thought I had isn't really mine anymore. And I'm not sure if there's any escaping the truth. The final step is waiting. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The world around me is a blur, a distorted mess of shadow and light, as if reality itself is unraveling at the edges. The streets stretch on forever, an endless path that loops back on itself, pulling me deeper into the heart of whatever this place is. I'm no longer sure where I am or what I'm supposed to be doing. Everything is collapsing. My legs feel like lead, but I keep moving, one foot in front of the other, even though every step feels like it's costing me a piece of myself. I don't feel human anymore. I feel like a puppet, strings pulled tight, muscles stiff and unwilling to respond. But still, I move, because that's all I know how to do now. The figure is behind me, always there, always waiting. I can feel it even though I haven't turned to face it. The air is thick with its presence, and I know it's watching me, waiting for the moment when I finally give up. But I won't. I can't. I glance back at the crowd. They're still moving, still locked in their trance. Their faces are lifeless, void of any expression or thought. They're just bodies moving in sync, led by some unseen force, driven by the same thing that's pulling me forward. And as I watch them, something cold grips my chest. Something deep inside me shifts, and for the first time, I feel the true weight of what's happening. They're not just following. They're lost. All of them. They're all gone, every single one. Just like I would be if I let myself fall back in line. I can't go back to that. I can't. The whisper in my mind grows louder again. But this time, it's not a comfort. It's an intrusion. The voice, that soft, persistent hum that's been trailing me since the beginning, is no longer urging me to choose. It's demanding. It's forceful, like it knows I'm reaching my breaking point. You don't have to fight. You don't have to struggle anymore. I stop. My breath catches in my throat, and I feel the familiar weight in my chest, that suffocating pressure pushing in from all sides. The voice is everywhere now, louder than ever, like 1,000 whispers wrapped around my mind. Give in. I can feel my thoughts beginning to slip away, like sand falling through my fingers. The words are coming faster now, more insistent. Give in. Become one of us. It's not even a suggestion anymore. It's a command. I shut my eyes, pressing my palms against my temples, trying to block it out. But the voices are relentless, pushing, pulling, warping my thoughts, my very sense of self. I can feel it. The figure is close. So close now. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I open my eyes and look ahead. The path is no longer just a street. It's an abyss. The ground beneath me is cracking, breaking apart, as if the world itself is giving way. The air is thick with the smell of decay, of something old and rotting, and I know deep down that I'm standing on the edge of something, the point of no return. I try to move, but my feet won't obey me. It's like the earth itself has turned against me, holding me in place, forcing me to face what's coming. I can't fight it anymore. I'm not strong enough. I feel the cold, clammy fingers of panic creeping up my spine, and then I hear it, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, heavy, rhythmic, coming from behind me. They don't belong to the crowd. They belong to something else, something far worse. I can't move. My legs are frozen in place, locked in some kind of vice. I'm trapped. The figure is right behind me, so close that I can feel its breath on my neck. Its presence is suffocating, pressing down on me, crushing the air from my lungs. I want to scream. I want to fight, but I can't. The footsteps stop. There's a brief, suffocating silence, and then it speaks. Its voice is deep, impossibly cold, like it's coming from the bottom of a well. You should have joined us when you had the chance. I try to turn around, but my body won't respond. I can't move. It's like I'm paralyzed, caught in some kind of spell. The figure's voice continues, low and mocking. As it steps closer, its presence suffocating me with each passing second. You're too late now. There's no escape. You're already ours. The words cut through me like a blade, and suddenly, I'm not sure if I've ever been in control of my own body. Was I always meant to be a part of this? Was I always destined to end up like them? The darkness presses in around me, curling in the corners of my vision, pulling me deeper. I feel the tug of the crowd, the cold weight of their movements, the pull of their lifeless forms. I try to fight it, but I'm too weak. My body is already betraying me. The figure's voice is everywhere, surrounding me, whispering in my ear, "You're just like them now. You'll become one with the crowd." I can feel it. It's happening. I'm slipping. I'm fading, and the last fragments of who I was are being swallowed whole. The thread of resistance I've been clinging to is thinning, snapping, and for a moment I consider it. I consider just giving up, letting the darkness take me, letting the crowd consume me. What's the point of fighting anymore? What's the point of struggling against something I can't understand? But then, a small, quiet voice in the back of my mind rises. It's weak, but it's there. The voice from before, the one that whispered of choice, of defiance. No, you're not like them. You're not lost. I can feel the spark of resistance flicker in the dark. It's small, it's fragile, but it's enough. I refuse to be a part of this. I refuse to let them win. I close my eyes and take one final, desperate step. I can't feel my legs anymore. The numbness that's taken over my body isn't just physical. It's mental, emotional. My thoughts feel distant, like they're no longer my own. The figure is here now. It's standing behind me, looming over me, its presence an oppressive weight that fills every inch of the air. The crowd moves in unison, a wall of blank faces, each person locked in their trance, following the path laid before them. But I'm not part of that anymore, am I? No, I'm not. I refuse to be. I stand on the precipice, staring down into the abyss. The ground beneath my feet is cracked, crumbling, like the very fabric of reality is giving way. The path ahead has no end. There's no way out. The air is heavy with something ancient, something suffocating. It presses in on me from all sides, leaving no room to breathe, no space to think. It's like the universe itself is closing in, a cage with no escape. The figure speaks again. Its voice is low and guttural, echoing in my skull, making my ears ring. It's close now, so close that I can almost feel its cold, clammy hands on my skin, its breath at the back of my neck. You still don't understand, do you? The words drip with mockery, each syllable a dagger. This was always meant to be. You were never meant to escape. You were always going to be a part of us. I want to scream. I want to shout back at it, to fight, to run, to do something. But I can't. My body is frozen in place, paralyzed by its overwhelming presence. The weight of its power presses down on me, smothering every ounce of will I have left. I want to move, to take one more step away from it, but the darkness pulls me back, roots me to the spot. You should have embraced it from the beginning. The figure's voice swirls around me, wrapping its tendrils around my thoughts. You were never meant to resist. You've always been part of the crowd, part of the plan. The sooner you accept it, the easier it will be. I want to close my eyes, to block out its voice, to shut it all out. But I can't. It's like the words are being etched into my mind, carving their way into my soul. And I feel something deep inside me, beginning to crumble. I feel the last remnants of my resistance start to disintegrate. It's like the figure is feeding off my doubt, my fear. It knows exactly where to press, exactly how to break me down. But then I remember something. A flicker, a memory, the voice from before, the one that kept me going all this time, the voice that whispered in the back of my mind, "You're not like them. You're not lost." It's weak, but it's there. A spark in the dark. A thread of resistance, just enough to hold on to. I'm not done yet. Not yet. I take a breath. It's shallow, almost painful, but I manage. I can feel the pressure in my chest, the weight of the figure pressing down on me, but I push against it. Just a little. One tiny movement. I feel it in my fingertips first, the tingling sensation of blood returning to numb limbs. It's a small thing, but it's enough. Enough to remind me that I'm still here, that I'm still me. The crowd moves past me, but they don't see me. They can't. They're all locked in the same trance, marching to the same beat. Their eyes are empty. Their bodies are empty. And for a moment, I envy them. I envy their simplicity, their certainty. They don't have to make this choice. They don't have to fight against something that feels so much bigger than themselves. But I'm not them. I can't be. I squeeze my eyes shut, trying to block out the figure's voice, but it's still there, echoing in my skull, gnawing at my thoughts. You cannot resist. You cannot win. We are inevitable. I take another breath. I know what I have to do now. I've been trying to outrun this thing, trying to escape, but it's not about escape. It never was. It's about choosing to stand my ground, choosing to fight, choosing not to give in to the darkness, no matter how real it feels, no matter how close the figure gets, no matter how thick the air grows around me. I can feel the figure's eyes on me now, burning into the back of my neck. It's waiting. It's watching. It knows what I'm going to do, and it knows it's trying to break me. But I won't let it. I will not let it. With every ounce of strength I can muster, I turn around. Slowly, my legs tremble beneath me, but I don't stop. I won't stop. I face the figure, but I don't see it. I can't see it. There's only darkness, a formless shape standing just beyond my vision, suffocating the light. And then I do it. I step forward, one foot in front of the other. The moment my foot hits the ground, the world shifts. The air cracks. The weight lifts. The figure's voice screams in frustration, but it doesn't matter anymore. The crowd moves past me, but I don't follow them. I refuse to follow them. I take another step, and then another, and then silence. For the first time in what feels like forever, the air is clear. The weight is gone. The figure is gone. I'm standing in the middle of the road, alone. The crowd is gone, lost to the shadows. The buildings are silent. The world is still, and I realize something. I've made it. I've chosen freedom. The final choice was mine all along, and I've chosen to walk away from the darkness.